Thank you. Thank you so much. This really means a lot to me, and it's wonderful to be back at a human rights campaign gala. Last time I was with HRC was down in Charlotte, North Carolina, on behalf of another HRC in more sensible times. Still, it's nice to be back in these weirder days, although it doesn't take much to prompt me to come to San Francisco. It's one of my favorite cities in the world. One day I hear San Francisco will be great again, so that's going to be good. I have to admit that I struggled a bit over what to say tonight, partly because I find writing torturous because writing's torturous, but moreover because I have no idea what the hell is going on right now in our country. I'm baffled. And it's not to say that I don't understand that we have a fucking moron in the White House. And I understand that because, well, his senior cabinet member reportedly said so. And I take his and the press's word on that, at least, because for as long as I've had the misfortune of being conscious of the existence of his now boss, I too have believed him to be a fucking moron. So no argument there. I understand that. But many don't see him like that, and I don't understand that. I struggle to understand that an individual who says, as our president, I will do everything in my power to protect our LGBTQ citizens from the violence and oppression of a hateful foreign ideology one day, but then who snuggles up yesterday with a domestic group that distributes pamphlets declaring homosexuality a public health issue, a group also addressed yesterday by the Republican senatorial candidate from Alabama who once said he thinks homosexuality should be illegal, whatever the fuck that means. I struggle to understand how that individual is not universally and objectively viewed as lying, untrustworthy, and bankrupt. One of his first orders of business before being sworn into the presidency was settling a fraud case for $25 million. What more does anyone need to see, aside from his tax returns? Guy personally lost $900 million in 1 year, but great businessman. Oh, okay. I have difficulty understanding how an individual who 5 times forced someone else to fight in his place in Vietnam and perhaps die there, and who objects to protests during the national anthem because by his logic they are disrespectful of America's service members, can also attempt to ban transgender service members from, well, serving, and still not universally and objectively be seen as disrespectful to American service members himself. People serving honorably right now in the military are being told by the commander-in-chief, or rather the comb-over in tweet, that they have no right to do so. What's more disrespectful than that, except sending them off into another avoidable, senseless war whose only purpose would be to offset the sense of hollowness and smallness their comb-over must feel owing to his tiny, burnt crisp of a damaged soul. Couldn't serve in Vietnam because of bunions or whatever, yet as a candidate, his doctor puts it out that he'll be the healthiest individual elected to the presidency. Healthiest. The guy who's said to believe that the human body is like a battery with a finite amount of energy which exercise drains, and who's built like a wrecked garbage truck. But he's the healthiest. I mean, I don't want to go on harping about this fucking moron, but it's one of the many lead linings of his presidency that we have to pay such close attention to this abysmal excuse of a human being. But I'm trying to understand those eyes which refuse to see him that way, which refuse to see him as the empty con man that he is. And so I remembered a gentleman I met a few years ago, Robert Trivers, a Harvard-trained social biologist who at one point in his career moved out here to teach at UC Santa Cruz and was introduced to and began to write and research with none other than Black Panther's co-founder, Huey Newton, who who'd been a graduate student in the History of Consciousness program at Santa Cruz. Probably would have been a Westworld fan. Trivers and Newton ended up pursuing a mutual academic interest, the phenomenon of self-deception. Newton's interest sprang from a long-time fascination with con games, large and small, and Trivers' interest sprang from trying to make sense of self-deception as a behavior passed down over the course of human evolution. In the natural world, Trivers mentions self-deception can be advantageous. A butterfly cocoon might resemble a snake's head to ward off hungry predators. Newton noted that self-deception can have social advantages for humans. A Latino American, for example, might pretend to know less English than she actually does to avoid interaction with an undesirable gringo. Trivers offered that in a fight, exaggerating one's size through a puffed-up chest, for example, can trick an equally strong adversary into feelings of inferiority. But self-deception practiced too long, they argued, can also lead to disaster when overconfidence and inattention to reality combine. Reality isn't a fool. So in 1982, they co-wrote a controversial and brutally insightful analysis of the factors behind the Air Florida disaster that saw a passenger jet crash into Washington, D.C.'s 14th Street Bridge minutes after takeoff in the midst of a very heavy snowstorm, most of its passengers perishing in the frigid waters of the Potomac River. And I remember that day vividly. I was a junior in high school at the time, and on my way home from school, I stopped on the other side of the Potomac to view the aftermath of the crash, along with a friend who shared my strange 16-year-old shivering curiosity. And my friend and I almost froze our tails off and didn't see much. But on examining the cockpit voice recording months after the tragedy, Trivers and Newton saw plenty. Based on what they'd heard on those recordings and read on the transcript, they argued that the accident could have been averted were it not for the attitude and behavior of the doomed plane's pilot, whom they described as a self-deceiver. On the day of the incident, the pilot was not in fact piloting the plane, but acting as co-pilot to his co-pilot, who was actually manning the controls, perhaps in a training exercise, and whom Trivers and Newton characterized as a reality seeker. And here's why. 30 minutes before takeoff, when asked by the co-pilot about ice on the wing on the side of the plane, the pilot answers, I got a little on mine. Co-pilot, however, describes his wing in more precise terms. This one's got about 1/4 to 1/2 inch on it all the way. Later, it was discovered that the airplane was experiencing 25% less thrust than normal, owing to snow and ice built up on the wings because the plane was de-iced too long before takeoff. As a result of this, 10 seconds after starting down the runway, with only 30 seconds left to abort takeoff safely, the co-pilot notices discrepancies in the plane's instrument readings. Co-pilot, God, look at that thing. Pilot, no response. Co-pilot, that doesn't seem right, does it? Pilot, no response. That's not right. Pilot, nothing. Well, then 11 seconds after the co-pilot first expresses concerns about whether the instrument reading is correct, the pilot responds, yes, it is. There's 80, referring to an airspeed of 80 knots. Immediately, the co-pilot, nah, I don't think that's right. Nothing again from the pilot. 9 seconds later, the co-pilot acquiesces. Maybe it is. Pilot says 120, again referring to the plane's speed. I don't know, co-pilot. 8 seconds later, the plane reaches the speed at which takeoff can no longer be aborted, and strangely, now the pilot becomes more vocal. Come on, forward, forward, just climb, he says at one point, as though now imploring the plane itself to respond to his voice. The last tragic words heard on the cockpit recording are, co-pilot, Larry, we're going down, Larry. Pilot, finally acknowledging the now dark reality, bemoans, I know it. Then the sound of impact. And it's a tragic event. And Trivers and Newton offer us a disturbing interpretation of the event, but a useful one for these strange times that we live in. The controls of our government are now in the hands, the small hands, of an overconfident, self-deceiving pilot who day after day resists a healthy relationship with reality. Of the 320 million people in this country, nobody's stronger than him, he tells us. Nobody will fight harder for LGBTQ rights than him. Nobody in this room. Nobody could have done more for Puerto Rico than what he's done. Over 90% of Puerto Ricans still have no electricity. 35% remain without access to clean drinking water, some now gathering water from an EPA-designated hazardous waste site. But nobody does it better than him. The images shown and the reports read from journalists on the ground, all fake. We're the highest taxed nation in the world, he says. The French laugh in our general direction. And of our country, which he and his supporters view as historically damaged, he alone can fix it. Puffed up, self-deceptive nonsense, which many Americans delight in swallowing whole. This cult of self-deceivers who claim our country, not yours, our flag. As though the flag doesn't represent the right to freedom of speech, but only the right to deploy the military. Those black NFL players kneeling during the anthem are sons of bitches, Nazis marching in Charlottesville. Well, some of them are very fine people. But he's not a racist, and neither am I for still supporting him, as if racism is not an objective thing. It is. The whole premise of white supremacy itself is a vast exercise in self-deception. Look at its leader in the White House. Who's he superior to? Obama? Thank you. I'm going to replace Obamacare with something much better. With what exactly? Well, we'll see. But what we see, and what's mind-blowing, is that our collective American organism is infected right now with self-deception. And maybe it's always been that. The greatest country in the world, every other country's a bum. But as the American experiment begins to stall in mid-flight and descend toward impact, will the self-deceivers have their I know it moment? Or is this what they want? They seem to. But a better question is, will reality-seeking America wrestle the controls away from self-deception in order to rescue the plane and all its passengers? Because the reality is, a sexual predator in Hollywood is the same as one in the White House or one in a church, and all should be dealt with consistently. The reality is, Judge Alonzo Curiel is an American citizen, whether or not you want to describe him cynically as a Mexican and a racist attempt to disparage him in one breath and talk law and order and the Constitution in the next. And the reality is, we don't worship God in the United States of America. The Constitution says we worship freely, whether Muslim, Jew, Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, pagan, or otherwise, if we so choose. And oh, by the way, a claim of religiosity isn't a cloak of invisibility for your hatred and bigotry and unconfronted fear. Reality seeking sees through all that. The reality is that those folks who suffered and died at Pulse nightclub shared an undeniable tragic commonality with those folks who died recently in Las Vegas while enjoying a night of country music. And undoubtedly, between those two groups, there were divergent political perspectives, but sadly, the reality is that they all shared vulnerability to a deranged man with access to ridiculously powerful weapons. And the reality is that a kid who dies from a stray bullet in Chicago or from police misconduct in Baltimore deserves, as an American, the same empathy and attention that's allegedly being shown by this administration to a kid who dies from an opioid overdose in New Hampshire. We're all in it together, and that's the reality. And resistance against the self-deceivers who say or act otherwise is essential right now. To paraphrase the words spoken at the Women's March in D.C. by another Bay Area legend, Angela Davis, every day of this administration will be a day of resistance, resistance on the ground, resistance in the classrooms, resistance on the job, resistance in our art, and resistance in our music. She's a reality seeker. Bob Mueller and his team are reality seekers, experienced in the realities of international financial crimes, espionage, and conspiracy. Angela Davis and the former head of the FBI are on the same side in this resistance. That brings hope. And I find hope in this award. I love this word ally. That Human Rights Campaign considers me an ally of the LGBT community is deeply gratifying, but it also implies as well that this community is an ally to me, and that's deeply comforting. Because we all come from experiences and backgrounds that have taught us to fight. And this isn't new to us, and we don't scare easily. And all of us right now must ally with one another and fight for control of this American plane. And we must continue to carve through the misinformation and lies, to speak out, to protest, to sue, to take a knee, sure, but also to vote. And so I accept this honor in celebration of the reality that no matter our background, class, race, religion, or sexual orientation, we are bound by our common humanity, and as relates to this country, by our common Americanness. And no self-deceiver or fucking moron can or will ever take that away from us, because it is what it is. Thank you.